In this video, let's look at the BiqMouth Formant generator. This is a sophisticated vocal modeling filter that simulates 5 formants using 5 bandpass filters set to different frequencies, amplitudes, and bandwidths that can be controlled through a few EaganMatrix parameters. So let's first talk about what a formant is. Well, if we look here at the cartoon of a vocal tract, you all likely know that we have a voice box where our vocal cords vibrate to create a sound that has a rather complex harmonic spectrum. So let's start by bringing up the spectrum analyzer and blowing through a trumpet mouthpiece as if that was our vocal cords. And that creates a rather interesting harmonic structure. You can see the overtones there. And if I take a trumpet and stick this in it and play that, I get another harmonic structure that's kind of similar to just the mouthpiece itself, but maybe with some more harmonics going on there, a little more complex. It's going through a fixed tubing, and I can't do very much to change the harmonic structure of that one tone. I mean, I could lengthen or shorten the tubing using the vowels, and that might change things a little bit, but there's not much I can do to change the harmonic structure. But with our voice is much different. Let's bring up that graphic again of our vocal tract. So when the voice box, the larynx, makes a sound out of our vocal cords, as you see, our throat is a very complicated kind of a tubing system. And unlike the trumpet, where the tube is fixed, all the little parts of our vocal tract can dynamically be changed according to how we shape our mouth. And then we have the tongue in there that can change the size of the tube. Our teeth and lips can do stuff. And then, of course, the nasal cavity affects things. All these little pieces can have their own harmonic frequency content. And after we start vibrating the vocal cords, each one of these little sections resonates at a different frequency. It brings out some frequencies and attenuates others based on the shape of your mouth. Each one of these little sections can tune to its own little resonant frequency, and that is basically what a formant is. All these little resonant parts that make up the vocal tract. And these can be modeled by a set of bandpass filters set to different frequencies at different amplitudes and bandwidths. And that's basically what the BiqMouth tries to do. It creates this set of filters that models the vocal tract. Now, what does all that mean? Let's do a similar experiment with the spectrum analyzer. I'll basically sing a tone, but I'll change the vowel shape as I sing, and you'll see the harmonic content on the same note changes drastically. So even though I'm singing the same note, you can see the frequency content changes based on those vowel sounds I make. And these formant programs basically try and model vowels. Because the consonants don't really affect that overall sound as much. They are initial attacks and bursts of noise and sound that can be added before these vocal vowel sounds are modeled if you want to. So let's bring up an empty preset. And what we're going to do is we're going to select a BiqMouth from our filter bank. And that takes an audio input. It takes a mouth shape that we'll talk about in a second. Initially, we'll set this to 0, and 0 happens to be a male mouth shape singing ah. Then we have a multiplier on those formants that are set up by that mouth shape. There's an offset of the formant frequencies. Then we have a formant bandwidth multiplier. Then we have the BiqMouth center control. And finally the BiqMouth amplitude spread. And a lot of these filter parameters are the same as what are used on some of the other filter banks. But the important thing is I want to feed in a sound with a complex overtone structure so that these filters can do their job better. What I'll do is, as it turns out, a sawtooth wave is a wave with a very complex overtone structure. And what we'll do is we'll create, with the other bank, a wave bank set to a sawtooth wave. Now to do that, it's very simple. all I have to do is put an amplitude in, and I'll use the amplitude based on the normal Z pressure, and I'm going to set the frequency of my first wave in the bank. I'm only going to use one for now, to X. And now if I bring that to the outputs, I'm in bank B. I can set this to 1 because pressure is going to control the input to the wave bank. And now let's bring up our spectrum analyzer. And we get a sawtooth-like wave that has all of our overtones in descending order as we'd expect them. Instead of sending that to output, I'm going to send that into my BiqMouth, and I will set the output to the output of the BiqMouth, which is bank A. And what I'll do here is I'll keep 0 for now, which is going to be an ah sound. The multiplier on the Formant is defaulting to 1, so I'll put a 1 in there. The offset defaults to 0, that's okay. The Formant bandwidth multiplier, 1 means each formant has its default bandwidth, so we'll stick that in as the default. The center control, 0, means the first formant is the center. That's a good default position. And the BiqMouth amplitude spread, 0, means no amplitude scaling, so that's obviously the default there as well. Now, that's about as simple a program as I can make, and let's see what happens when I play. That's all you have to do to get the basic vocal sound out of the BiqMouth. That's nice, but I want to be able to get more than just an ah sound out of this. And it turns out, if we bring up the manual, there's a table of vowel sounds that you can get out by using values in this mouth shape parameter, SH, of 0 to 4.5. And some of those are going to be male sounds, male vowels, as in the yellow in this table, and some of those are going to be female mouth shapes using the same vowel sounds that are the mauve color here. Even though some of these are the same, let's create a barrel to cycle through all of them from 0 to 4.5. We'll create a barrel. 1 equals, let's say, mouth shape. And I know there's a barrel style under the filter options. Includes all of these values. That's 56. So we'll add that. And now I have this barrel that cycles through all the values in my table. So let's set that barrel to a formula, A. And for right now, let's just set this to 1. And we'll set to barrel 1. And I'll cycle through this and take a look at the MIDI values that are coming out. I'll cycle to the top of this table. And it stops at 45, but if I keep increasing the barrel, you can see the MIDI values go to the full value of 127. So if I want this to only go to that top value, I'm going to want to cap this at 4.5. Now how do I do that? Alright, let's set this barrel to go from a range of 0 to 127. And the multiplier on this then we'll set to 0.1, and we'll put our formula on our mouth shape. And now let's cycle through. On the first value, I'm 0. I'll go to the next one. I'm 0.1 because I'm multiplying 0.1 times all the values up through my MIDI value 0 to 127. So when I get to the top now, I should be at 4.5. But I can go past that. You'll see, right? I want to cap it at 4.5, so what I'll do is I will create another formula and set that to the maximum value that I want to go to, 4.5, and I'll go to my first formula and I'll make ancillary of the formula I just used, but I'm going to use the minimum function. And what this means is I'll get the minimum of the two formulas A and B. Of course, as I move now up to 4.5, that will be the minimum. When I go past 4.5, B will take over in the calculation, and that's set at 4.5 as the new minimum, so I'll never go past 4.5. So let me play a note. I'll move up. You can hear the vowels changing. And I'll get to the top and continue to move right up to value 127. But you can see I'm capped at 4.5. So now the values map to what I want them to be. So let's give it a shot. I know the low value in the table is the male ah sound. So let's play around there. But if I try and play really high now, that's a little forced, so let me go to what I know is the female ah. I know that's the last one in this table, and let's see what it sounds like if I play at the upper range on that female ah sound. Much more natural, okay? And now I can set this to any of my vowel sounds if I want. If I want to play another sound up top. And I can play another one at the bottom, maybe. And then, if I want, I can do some more sophisticated programming to try and morph between these. But we'll leave that for another time. I've brought up the analyzer and connected the Kenton MIDI controller so I can control barrel 1 with a dial. Let me play a fixed tone, and you'll easily be able to see how the harmonic structure of these formants is changing from setting to setting. And so forth. Obviously, Ed and Lippold have done the heavy lifting of presetting these things to the right formant frequencies to give us the mouth shapes that we want. But it's going to be a little bit easier to see exactly what's going on if I feed this thing noise instead of a complex waveform. What I've done to make things easier for us is I've created barrels for all the controls of the BiqMouth so that we can see what's really going on here. I've disabled the sawtooth wave and created a new formula that sends just a little bit, 0.1, of noise into that BiqMouth instead of the sawtooth wave. Now we'll be able to see those 5 formant filters better and what they're really doing. So I'll play some noise. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 filters that are set to certain frequencies and bandwidth and amplitudes that are going to match the mouth shape that Ed and Lippold are looking for at this point. If I change that, you'll see these 5 formant filters will change significantly. Sometimes they're actually hard to see based on their setting. Let's go back to one here where we can see the 5 filters. I've set the gens and barrels to values that are representative in the manual. Well, let's take a look at what some of these other parameters are doing. There's the frequency spread. That's a multiplier on the frequencies and an offset on the frequencies. These are similar, but they do a little bit different things. So let's take a look. We'll first look at the frequency spread. There are 5 filters. And as I play, you see all the frequencies are moving. But it's keeping the same scale distance between them. We can make them so that they're high enough to just go off the range of hearing and bring them back. The other offset is not scaling in that way. It's moving them, but as they move, they're getting closer and closer together. That gives you a much different kind of a sound, a lot more high frequency content as you move up. Now the other 2 parameters, the formant bandwidth multiplier and the amplitude spread, They both are in relation to which of the 5 filters is set as the center. Now the amplitude spread's pretty easy to see. I've set the center so that it's the first of the 5 filters, and let's play with the amplitude spread now. You can see the amplitude of the filters are decreasing away from the center. So my base frequency is always there. Now let's do the opposite. Let's set the center as the last of the 5 filters. And there you see the filters are decreasing in amplitude farther away from the center, and the center is the last one. That basically is taking off all the low frequency components and leaving the high. Now in the bandwidth multiplier, let's set center to 0 again. I set this really low so that the resonance can come out, and you'll see the peaks. They'll actually start ringing. This would be too low to be used for the actual formant, but it's easier to see what's going on. So at the center on the first filter, if I change that bandwidth multiplier, the bandwidth is getting larger, and of course that resonance goes down, and things all come together. If I take the center as the last filter, I don't see quite so much difference on this one. I can see more of the high-end filters still, whereas when at the center is the beginning, I can't really see too much difference here, but we'll be able to hear it when we apply it to the actual formant sound. So I've set the parameters back to what makes sense for using it on a vocal sound, and let's just quickly run through how these parameters really affect the voice that we had initially. We start with the ah sound, and let's see what happens when we play with the frequency spread. You can hear it sounds kind of more distorted and guttural and froggy. Well, we might not always want to create a sound that's a nice singer sound. And frequency offset will do something similar. Now let's play with the bandwidth multiplier. That can give a more subtle kind of a quality to the sound. And let's set it to a different center value. As we said, that center doesn't affect that as much as the amplitude spread. So now let's play with the amplitude spread. And as expected, I can hear the volume of those filters are reducing. And if I change the center, you can play around with any combination of these, of course, to get kind of strange, unusual sounds. Almost sounds like some old kind of recording that you can get out of here. So that's the basics of the Formant controls. Play around with them, set them to different values as specified in the manual. And the next video, we'll talk about how we can really use this in various ways.